The fort stood silent against the Nebraska sky, its wooden walls weathered by years of wind and snow. And inside those walls, Penelope Sullivan sat alone on a wooden bench with her hands pressed against her swollen belly while tears streaked down her dirt-smudged cheeks. She had been left there 3 days ago by the man who promised to love her forever, abandoned like unwanted cargo when he realized the baby she carried would tie him down to responsibilities he never wanted. And now she waited with no money, no family, and nowhere to go while soldiers passed by without meeting her eyes. The year was 1878, and Wood River was a small town in Nebraska where the railroad had brought opportunity and heartbreak in equal measure, where women like her were judged harshly, and forgiveness came slow if it came at all. Xavier Kane rode through the fort gates on his bay mare just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. His weathered hat pulled low over dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, dust coating his worn leather vest and the bandana tied loosely around his neck. He was 26 years old and had been working cattle drives since he was 16, saving money to buy his own land, living a life that was hard but honest. His hazel eyes scanned the fort compound out of habit, taking in the soldiers drilling in the yard, the wagons being loaded with supplies. And then he saw her sitting alone near the barracks, her posture speaking of defeat and despair. Something in Xavier's chest tightened at the sight, because he recognized that particular kind of loneliness, having felt it himself when his parents died of fever and left him orphaned at 15. He dismounted and led his horse toward the water trough, but his gaze kept returning to the young woman whose auburn hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders, whose green eyes stared at nothing while her hands cradled her pregnant belly protectively. She wore a simple calico dress that had seen better days, the fabric dusty and wrinkled, and she had no bags or belongings visible nearby. Xavier tied his horse and walked slowly toward her, removing his hat as he approached because his mother had taught him manners before she died. The woman looked up at him with wariness in her eyes, her body tensing as though preparing to flee or fight despite her obvious exhaustion. "Evening, madam," Xavier said gently, keeping his distance so she would not feel threatened. "I do not mean to intrude, but I could not help noticing you are sitting out here alone. Are you waiting for someone?" Penelope's throat tightened because kindness was the last thing she expected, and it threatened to break the fragile control she had over her emotions. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and thirst. "I am not waiting for anyone." Xavier frowned, glancing around the compound before returning his attention to her. "Forgive me for being direct, but you look like you have been here a while. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" The temperature drops fast once the sun goes down. Fresh tears welled in Penelope's eyes, and she shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She felt ashamed and afraid, vulnerable in ways she had never experienced before, carrying a child she already loved desperately despite the circumstances of its conception. The cowboy crouched down so he was at eye level with her, his expression serious but not unkind. "My name is Xavier Kane. I have a small ranch about 5 miles from here. Nothing fancy, but it has a roof and a warm stove. If you need a place to rest, you are welcome there. No strings, no expectations. I just cannot ride away knowing you are sitting here with night coming on and nowhere to go." Penelope studied his face, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motives, but all she saw was genuine concern in those hazel eyes. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You do not even know me." Xavier was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "My mother used to say that we are all just passing through this world, and the only things that matter are the kindnesses we show each other." She would have my hide if I left a woman in need sitting alone at a fort with no help coming. He met her eyes steadily. You are not alone anymore, I promise. Those words broke something open inside Penelope, and she began to cry in earnest, covering her face with her hands while her shoulders shook. Xavier remained crouched beside her, not touching her but staying close, his presence solid and reassuring. When her sobs finally subsided into hiccups, he offered her a canteen of water and a clean handkerchief from his pocket. Thank you, Penelope managed, drinking deeply and then wiping her face. I am Penelope Sullivan. My family is back in Ohio, and I came west with a man who said he wanted to marry me. When he found out about the baby, he left me here 3 days ago with nothing. I have been too ashamed to ask the soldiers for help, and I did not know what to do. Xavier's jaw tightened with anger at the man who could abandon a pregnant woman, but he kept his voice calm. Well, Penelope Sullivan, you have help now whether that coward comes back or not. Can you ride, or would you be more comfortable in a wagon? I can rent one from the fort if needed. I can ride if you go slowly, Penelope said, wiping her eyes again. I do not want to be a burden. You are not a burden, Xavier said firmly, standing and offering her his hand. You are a person in need, and helping you is the right thing to do. That makes you my responsibility now, until you are back on your feet and can decide what you want to do next. Penelope took his hand and let him help her stand, her legs trembling from sitting so long and from exhaustion. Xavier steadied her with a gentle grip on her elbow, his touch respectful but firm. He retrieved his horse and helped her mount, then swung up behind her so she could lean back against his chest for support during the ride. His arms came around her to hold the reins, creating a protective circle that made her feel safer than she had in months. The ride to Xavier's ranch took almost an hour because he kept the pace slow and steady, not wanting to jostle her unnecessarily. Penelope dozed against him, too exhausted to stay fully awake, and Xavier found himself adjusting his position to make sure she was comfortable. He did not know what had possessed him to invite a strange pregnant woman to his home, but something about her desperation and courage had struck a chord deep in his chest. She had not begged or made excuses, just answered his questions honestly, and he respected that. The ranch came into view as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, a modest homestead with a small house, a barn, and a corral where 3 horses grazed peacefully. Xavier had built most of it himself over the past 3 years, taking pride in every board and nail. It was not much compared to the big cattle operations further west, but it was his, and he had plans to expand once he saved more money. Penelope stirred as the horse stopped, blinking sleepily and then tensing when she realized where she was. I cannot impose on you like this, she said, anxiety creeping into her voice. People will talk. Your reputation will suffer. Xavier dismounted and then helped her down carefully, keeping his hands on her waist until he was sure she was steady. Let them talk, he said with a shrug. I know the truth, and that is all that matters. Besides, the nearest neighbor is 2 miles away and they mind their own business. Come inside. You need food and rest. The house was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom off to one side and a small loft above. Xavier lit the oil lamps while Penelope stood uncertainly by the door, taking in the handmade furniture and the neat stacks of books on a shelf. There were curtains on the windows and a quilt folded over the back of a rocking chair, small touches that spoke of someone trying to make a home rather than just a place to sleep. The bedroom is yours, Xavier said, adding wood to the stove. I will sleep in the loft. There is a basin and pitcher for washing, and I will heat some water so you can clean up properly. When was the last time you ate a real meal? Penelope tried to remember and could not. "I had some bread yesterday morning," she admitted. "The soldiers' wives gave me scraps when no one was looking." Xavier's expression darkened, but he just nodded and began pulling supplies from his shelves. Within 30 minutes, he had coffee brewing and was frying salt pork with beans. Simple food but hot and filling. Penelope sat at the table and watched him work, still half convinced this was a dream and she would wake up back on that bench at the fort. When Xavier set the plate in front of her, she ate slowly at first and then with increasing hunger, finishing everything and accepting seconds when he offered. He ate his own meal standing by the stove, giving her space but keeping an eye on her to make sure she was truly all right. "Thank you," Penelope said when she finally pushed the empty plate away. "I cannot remember the last time someone took care of me like this." Xavier poured her more coffee and refilled his own cup. "How far along are you, if you do not mind me asking?" "About 6 months," Penelope said, resting her hand on her belly. "The baby moves a lot, especially at night. I can feel little feet kicking." A small smile crossed Xavier's face. "My sister had 3 babies before she died of consumption 5 years ago. I remember how she used to complain about them kicking her ribs and keeping her awake." The smile faded. She was a good mother, even when she was sick. "Her husband moved back east with the children after she passed, and I have not seen them since." Penelope heard the loneliness in his voice and understood it intimately. "You have lost a lot of people," she said softly. "Most everyone I ever cared about," Xavier admitted, staring into his coffee. "That is why I know how it feels to be alone. I would not wish that on anyone, especially not when they are about to bring a new life into the world." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling of the fire and the ticking of a clock the only sounds. Finally, Xavier stood and heated water for her to wash with, then showed her to the bedroom and wished her good night. Penelope closed the door and leaned against it, overwhelmed by the kindness of a stranger and terrified that she was falling apart after holding herself together for so long. She washed carefully and then climbed into the bed, which was more comfortable than anything she had slept on in months. The sheets smelled like soap and sunshine, and the pillow was soft beneath her head. For the first time since being abandoned, Penelope felt a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be all right. Xavier lay in the loft and stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of Penelope settling in below. He had acted on impulse bringing her here, but he could not regret it. There was something about her that drew him, beyond just the obvious need for help. She had strength beneath the fear, a quiet dignity despite her circumstances, and when she had looked at him with those green eyes, he had felt something shift in his chest. The next morning, Xavier woke before dawn as was his habit and went outside to tend the animals, giving Penelope privacy and time to wake naturally. He fed the horses, checked the fences, and was repairing a loose board on the barn when she emerged from the house, her hair braided back from her face and her dress straightened as much as possible. "Good morning," Penelope called, walking carefully across the yard. "I would have made breakfast, but I did not want to presume." Xavier straightened and wiped his hands on his pants. "You are not presuming. You are a guest, but if you want to help, I would not say no to company while I cook." They fell into an easy rhythm, Xavier frying eggs and toasting bread while Penelope set the table and poured coffee. It felt domestic and comfortable, like they had been doing this for years instead of hours, and both of them noticed, but neither commented on it. Over breakfast, Xavier asked gently about her situation. "I know it is hard to talk about, but I need to understand your circumstances so I can help properly. Do you want to contact your family in Ohio? I can pay for a telegram if that would help." Penelope's hands tightened around her coffee cup. My father is a preacher. When I told him I was going west to marry William, he said I was making a mistake and that I should not come back if things went wrong. He is a hard man, very strict about sin and reputation. If he found out I was pregnant and unmarried, he would disown me completely. What about your mother? She does what my father tells her, Penelope said sadly. I have 2 younger sisters still at home, and I worry that my scandal would hurt their chances of making good marriages. It is better if I figure this out on my own. Xavier studied her across the table, admiring her strength even as his heart ached for her isolation. You have options, he said carefully. You can stay here as long as you need, no conditions attached. I will not touch you or expect anything improper. When the baby comes, I will make sure you have a doctor or midwife, and afterward, I can help you find work in town if that is what you want. Or if you decide you want to go back east or somewhere else, I will pay for your ticket and give you enough money to get started. Penelope's eyes filled with tears. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I could be a terrible person for all you know. I trust my instincts about people, Xavier said simply. And my instincts tell me you are a good woman who made the mistake of trusting the wrong man. That does not make you terrible. It makes you human. I do not know how I will ever repay you, Penelope whispered. I am not keeping accounts, Xavier replied. Just get healthy and take care of that baby. That is payment enough. The days turned into weeks, and a routine developed between them that felt natural and right. Penelope helped with cooking and mending, light tasks that did not strain her too much, while Xavier worked the ranch and made runs into Wood River for supplies. He introduced her to his neighbors, an elderly couple named Harold and Martha Jensen, as his cousin from Ohio who was staying with him for a while. The Jensens did not question the story too closely, just welcomed Penelope warmly and offered to help when the baby came. Martha Jensen was a former midwife who had delivered half the babies in the county, and she examined Penelope one afternoon while Xavier and Harold repaired fence line together. You are healthy and the baby is growing well, Martha pronounced, patting Penelope's hand. Another 3 months or so, I would guess. Xavier is taking good care of you. He has been wonderful, Penelope admitted, blushing slightly. I do not know what I would have done without him. Martha's knowing eyes crinkled at the corners. He is a good man, that one. Lost so much in his life, but never let it make him bitter. Any woman would be lucky to have him. Penelope did not respond, but her heart beat faster because she had been having the same thoughts herself. Over the past weeks, she had fallen into the habit of watching Xavier when he did not know she was looking, admiring the way he moved with easy confidence, the gentleness in his strong hands when he handled the horses, the quiet intelligence in his eyes when he read in the evenings. He treated her with respect and kindness, never pressuring her or making her feel uncomfortable, and she found herself drawn to him in ways that both excited and frightened her. Xavier was having his own private struggles with his growing feelings for Penelope. He had told himself he was just helping someone in need, being a good neighbor and a decent human being, but he could not deny the warmth that filled his chest when she smiled at him, or the way his day felt brighter when she was near. He loved hearing her hum while she worked in the kitchen, loved the way she asked him questions about ranching and actually listened to his answers, loved watching her hands rest on her belly when the baby kicked and seeing the love in her eyes for her unborn child. But he also knew she was vulnerable and dependent on him, and he would never take advantage of that. So he kept his feelings locked away and focused on being the friend and protector she needed, telling himself that would be enough. One evening in early autumn, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Penelope had been quiet all day, and Xavier sensed something was bothering her. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly, using the nickname that had developed naturally between them. Penelope was silent for a long moment, then said, "I was thinking about William and how angry I was at him for leaving me. But now I realize that if he had stayed, I never would have met you and my life would be so much poorer for it. Is that terrible of me?" Xavier's breath caught in his throat. "No," he managed. "It is not terrible at all." "I have been thinking a lot about the future," Penelope continued, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "About what happens after the baby is born and what kind of life I want to build, and I keep coming back to the same thought." "What thought is that?" Penelope turned to look at him, her green eyes serious and full of something that made Xavier's heart race. "That I do not want to leave here, that this place feels more like home than anywhere I have ever been. That you make me feel safe and valued and cared for in ways I never felt before, even with my own family." Xavier swallowed hard. "Penelope, you do not have to say these things out of gratitude. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything in return." "I know that," Penelope said, reaching out to touch his hand where it rested on the porch rail. "That is exactly why I feel this way. You have asked for nothing but given me everything. You have treated me with respect and kindness when I had every reason to expect judgment and scorn. You have made me believe that I deserve good things, that my past mistakes do not define my future. How could I not fall in love with you?" Xavier froze, his hand tingling where her fingers touched his skin. "Penelope," he breathed, afraid to believe what he was hearing. "I love you, Xavier Kane," she said clearly, her voice strong despite the tears threatening to fall. "I love the way you talk to your horses like they are old friends. I love how you read the same passages in your books over and over when something moves you. I love your patience and your strength and your gentle heart. I know I am carrying another man's child and that complicates things, but I needed you to know how I feel." Xavier turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers, holding tight. "I have been in love with you for weeks," he admitted roughly. "Maybe since that first night at the fort. I just did not want to burden you with my feelings when you had so much else to deal with. But Penelope, if you are asking what I think you are asking, then you need to understand something. I do not care whose blood runs in that baby's veins. If you stay here, if you choose me, then that child will be mine in every way that matters. I will love it and raise it and protect it just like I would my own flesh and blood. Can you accept that?" Penelope's tears spilled over, but she was smiling through them. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I can accept that. I want that more than anything." Xavier stood and pulled her gently to her feet, cupping her face in his calloused hands with infinite care. "Then I am going to kiss you now, if that is all right with you." "Please," Penelope breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sweet and full of promise. The kiss was gentle because Xavier was mindful of her condition and her past hurt, but it conveyed everything he had been holding back for weeks. Penelope melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt, her heart soaring with joy and relief and love so fierce it took her breath away. When they finally pulled apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Will you marry me, Penelope Sullivan? I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I want to build a future with you, raise your baby together, maybe have more children if you want them. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. Say yes." "Yes," Penelope said through happy tears. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Wood River, with the Jensens standing as witnesses, and the young minister blessing their union with genuine warmth. Penelope wore a new dress that Martha had helped her sew, pale blue calico with lace at the collar, and Xavier wore his best shirt and vest with his dark hair neatly combed. When he slipped a simple gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Penelope felt like her heart would burst from happiness. The autumn passed in a haze of contentment as they settled into married life. Xavier was patient and gentle with Penelope, understanding that her pregnancy made physical intimacy complicated. They shared a bed, but he held her carefully, his hand resting on her belly to feel the baby kick, whispering to both of them in the darkness about the life they would build together. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow and cold winds that whistled through the gaps in the barn walls. Xavier worked to winterize the ranch while Penelope nested, preparing blankets and tiny clothes for the baby's arrival. Martha visited regularly to check on her progress, pronouncing everything healthy and normal. On a freezing December night, Penelope woke Xavier with a gentle shake of his shoulder. "It is time," she said calmly, though her eyes were wide with fear and anticipation. "The pain started an hour ago." Xavier was out of bed immediately, pulling on his clothes and boots while fighting down panic. He had helped deliver calves and foals, but never a human baby, and the thought of something going wrong terrified him. He saddled his fastest horse and rode through the dark to fetch Martha, returning within an hour to find Penelope pacing the main room and breathing through contractions. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Xavier stayed by Penelope's side the entire time, holding her hand when she needed to squeeze something, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement when she was exhausted and afraid. Martha directed everything with calm efficiency, and just as the winter sun climbed above the horizon, a baby's cry filled the small house. "It is a boy," Martha announced, wrapping the infant in clean blankets and placing him in Penelope's arms. "Small but healthy with good lungs." Penelope looked down at her son, tears streaming down her exhausted face, and felt love so overwhelming it was almost painful. The baby had dark hair and eyes that would probably turn brown or hazel, and he squirmed in her arms seeking warmth and comfort. Xavier knelt beside the bed, staring at the tiny person who had just entered the world, and felt his heart expand to include this child he had not fathered but already loved completely. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers immediately curled around his, gripping tight, and Xavier felt something fundamental shift in his soul. "What should we name him?" Penelope looked at her husband with shining eyes. "I want to name him after you, if that is all right. Xavier Sullivan Kane. He is ours, yours and mine from this moment forward." Xavier's vision blurred with tears as he leaned forward to kiss his wife's forehead and then his son's. "Xavier Sullivan Kane," he repeated softly. "Welcome home, little one. I promise to protect you and love you all your days." Martha left after making sure Penelope and the baby were settled, promising to return in a few days to check on them. Xavier moved carefully around the house, bringing Penelope food and water, changing the baby when needed, learning the skills of fatherhood with determination and surprising gentleness. The first weeks were exhausting as they adjusted to life with a newborn, but Xavier never complained. He would walk the floor at night with the baby so Penelope could sleep, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until little Xavier quieted. He changed dirty cloths without flinching and learned to interpret the different cries that meant hunger, tiredness, or discomfort. Penelope watched her husband become a father and fell even more deeply in love with him. He was patient and devoted, treating their son with such tenderness that it brought tears to her eyes. When she told him he was a natural at fatherhood, Xavier just shrugged and said, I am just doing what any father should do." But Penelope knew better. She had seen too many men who could not be bothered with infant care, who considered children their wives' responsibility until the children were old enough to be useful. Xavier was different, fully engaged and committed, and she thanked God every day for bringing them together. Winter deepened, and the ranch was snowed in for days at a time, but the small house felt warm and full of life. Xavier kept the fire burning and the animals tended while Penelope cared for their son, and in the evenings they would sit together with the baby between them, talking about their dreams and plans for the future. "I want to expand the herd this spring," Xavier said one night, his finger tracing circles on the baby's tiny palm. "If we can build up the cattle operation, we will have more security and a better future for Xavier and any other children we might have." Penelope smiled at the thought of more children, of filling this house with love and laughter. "I want that too," she said softly. "A real family built on love and respect." "We already have that," Xavier pointed out, leaning over to kiss her gently. "Everything else is just details." When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and turning the prairie green, the ranch came alive with activity. Xavier hired 2 hands to help with the cattle work, young men from town who were reliable and hardworking. Penelope managed the house and cared for Xavier, who was growing rapidly and showing signs of his mother's spirit and his father's steady temperament. The summer brought a surprise when Penelope realized she was pregnant again, barely 9 months after giving birth to Xavier. She had mixed feelings about another baby so soon, worried about managing 2 small children, but Xavier was thrilled. "Another little one to love," he said, pulling her into his arms and resting his hand on her still flat stomach. "I hope it is a girl this time." "A little version of you with green eyes and auburn hair." Penelope laughed and swatted his chest playfully. "You just want someone to spoil." "Absolutely," Xavier agreed without shame. "I fully intend to be the father who cannot say no to his daughter." Their second child was indeed a girl, born on a warm October afternoon with much less difficulty than her brother's birth. They named her Patricia Rose Kane, and true to his word, Xavier was immediately wrapped around her tiny fingers. She had her mother's coloring and her father's hazel eyes, and she was a calm baby who rarely fussed. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next few years. The cattle operation grew steadily, allowing them to hire more help and expand their holdings. Xavier proved to be an astute businessman and a respected member of the community, while Penelope became known for her kindness and her skill with medicinal herbs, often helping neighbors when they were sick or injured. Young Xavier grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about horses and cattle and the land. Patricia was quieter but equally intelligent, with a fierce streak of independence that made her parents laugh. They were joined by a third child 3 years after Patricia's birth, another boy they named Peter Michael Kane, who had his father's dark hair and his mother's quick smile. The ranch prospered and the family thrived, but Xavier and Penelope never forgot the difficult circumstances that had brought them together. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met at the fort, Xavier would take Penelope's hand and repeat the words that had changed both their lives. "You are not alone anymore, I promise." And Penelope would respond with the words she had said on that porch the night she confessed her love. "I love you, Xavier Kane, today and always." They did face challenges over the years, as all families do. There were droughts that tested the ranch's resources, winters that were brutally cold, illnesses that frightened them badly even though everyone recovered. Young Xavier asked questions about his birth father as he got older, And Penelope answered honestly but without bitterness, explaining that some people were not ready to be parents, but that it did not matter because he had a father who loved him completely. Xavier confirmed this by sitting his oldest son down when the boy was 12 and saying plainly, "Blood does not make a family. Love and commitment make a family. I chose to be your father the moment I met your mother, and I have never regretted that choice for a single second. You are my son in every way that matters, and nothing will ever change that." Young Xavier hugged his father fiercely, and the question never came up again. The children grew strong and capable, learning the skills they would need to run the ranch someday if they chose. Young Xavier showed a talent for working with horses, gentling even the most difficult animals with patience and intuition. Patricia surprised everyone by developing an interest in the financial side of ranching, keeping meticulous records and suggesting improvements that increased their profits. Peter was still young but showed signs of having his father's leadership abilities and his mother's compassion. When young Xavier turned 18, a stranger rode onto the ranch asking to speak with Penelope. Xavier stood beside his wife as the man dismounted, his hand resting protectively on her lower back, and they both tensed when they recognized William's features in the stranger's face. "My name is William Thorne," the man said, removing his hat and looking uncomfortable. "I am looking for Penelope Sullivan. I was told she might be here." "I am Penelope Kane," Penelope said coldly, emphasizing her married name. "What do you want?" William Thorne looked at the ground. "I am here to apologize and to offer financial support for my son. I left you at the fort 18 years ago, and I have regretted it every day since. I was young and stupid and scared, but that is no excuse. I heard through mutual acquaintances that you had settled in Nebraska, and I wanted to make amends." "Your amends are not needed or wanted," Xavier said firmly before Penelope could respond. "Your son has been raised with love and care, and he has a father. Me. Whatever you thought you would accomplish by coming here, you can turn around and leave now." "I would like to meet him," William said weakly. "Just once, to see that he is all right." Penelope's initial anger faded as she looked at the man who had abandoned her and realized she felt nothing, no residual pain or longing, just indifference. "You gave up the right to know him when you left me pregnant and alone at a military fort," she said quietly but with steel in her voice. "Xavier Kane has been his father since before he was born. You are nothing to him or to me. Go back to wherever you came from and do not return." Young Xavier, who had been working in the barn, walked over to see what was happening. He looked between the stranger and his parents with confusion until Penelope explained quietly who William was. The young man studied his biological father with curiosity, but no recognition or connection. "I appreciate that you wanted to apologize to my mother," young Xavier said politely but firmly. "But my father is standing right here beside her, and he is the only father I need or want. I wish you well, but I have no interest in a relationship with you." William Thorne's face crumpled with regret and pain, but he nodded and mounted his horse without another word, riding away and leaving the Kane family standing together in the yard. Xavier wrapped his arms around Penelope and pulled her close. "Are you all right?" he murmured against her hair. "I am fine," Penelope assured him, turning in his embrace to look up at his face. "Actually, I am better than fine. Seeing him just confirmed what I have always known. You are the love of my life, Xavier Kane, and I would not change a single moment of our journey together. Even the hard parts." Xavier asked with a small smile. "Especially the hard parts," Penelope replied, reaching up to cup his cheek. "They brought us to this moment, to this life we have built together. I regret nothing." Young Xavier cleared his throat awkwardly. "I am going back to work now because you two are getting sappy," and I do not need to see that." His parents laughed and let him go, but they stayed standing together in the yard, watching the sun dip toward the horizon and painting the Nebraska sky in brilliant colors. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and occasional sorrows. Martha Jensen died peacefully in her sleep at 83, and the entire Kane family attended her funeral, remembering the woman who had helped bring their children into the world. Harold followed his wife 6 months later, and Xavier and Penelope made sure he had a proper burial next to Martha in the Wood River Cemetery. The ranch continued to thrive under Xavier's management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. He was elected to the local town council twice, using his position to advocate for better schools and infrastructure, always remembering how education and opportunity could change lives. Penelope became a beloved figure in the community, her early shame and scandal long forgotten by everyone who knew her. She volunteered at the church, taught Sunday school, and mentored young women who were facing difficult situations, always offering compassion and practical help without judgment. Their children grew into capable adults who made them proud. Young Xavier took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch when he was 25, allowing his father to slow down and enjoy more time with Penelope. Patricia married a banker from Omaha and became a successful businesswoman in her own right, though she visited the ranch frequently with her husband and children. Peter studied law and set up a practice in Wood River, becoming known for his integrity and his willingness to take cases from clients who could not afford expensive representation. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Penelope with a trip to the fort where they had met. They rode there on a warm spring day, their bodies still strong despite the passage of years, and stood together in the compound where their story had begun. "I remember sitting on that bench feeling like my life was over," Penelope said softly, pointing to the spot where she had waited alone and afraid. "I could not imagine a future beyond the next hour, let alone the next day." Xavier wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I remember seeing you sitting there and feeling like I had been hit in the chest with something powerful. I knew you needed help, but I did not know you would become the center of my entire world." Penelope turned in his arms and kissed him deeply, pouring 20 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. "You saved me, Xavier Kane, not just from being alone at the fort, but from a life without love or purpose or belonging. You gave me everything." "We saved each other," Xavier corrected gently. "You gave me a family and a reason to build something lasting instead of just surviving day to day. You made my house a home and my life complete. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." They stood together at the fort until the sun began to set, remembering the past but focused on the future that still stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. Xavier and Penelope Kane lived long, full lives surrounded by children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. Their ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations who remembered the story of how it all began with a pregnant woman abandoned at a fort and a cowboy who could not ride away from someone in need. On their 50th wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows in the same church where they had married, their hands wrinkled but their grips still strong, their hair gray but their eyes still bright with love. Young Xavier, now a 50-year-old man with children of his own, stood as his father's best man just as he had stood as a toddler in his mother's arms at the original ceremony. The entire town of Wood River attended the celebration, testament to the respect and affection the community held for the couple. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army, and at the center of it all, Xavier and Penelope Kane held each other close and swayed to an old waltz, lost in each other's eyes. "You remember what I told you that first night," Xavier murmured as they danced. "You are not alone anymore, I promise." "You kept that promise every single day for 50 years, Penelope replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You have been my partner, my protector, my best friend, and the love of my life. I could not have asked for a better man to walk this journey with." "The journey is not over yet," Xavier said with a smile. "We have more years ahead of us, more grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch together. I am not done loving you, Penelope Kane." "Good," Penelope laughed, resting her head on his chest, "because I am not done loving you either." They lived another decade together, their bodies gradually slowing but their minds and spirits remaining sharp and engaged. They spent their final years surrounded by family, telling stories about the old days and watching new generations grow and thrive on the land they had built together. Xavier Kane died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86, his hand clasped in Penelope's, his last words a whispered, "I love you," that she would carry in her heart forever. Penelope grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still thrived, in the community that held her up during her darkest days. She lived another 3 years after Xavier's death, spending her time writing down the story of their love for future generations, wanting them to understand that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the greatest blessings. She wrote about being left alone at a fort, about a cowboy with kind eyes who offered help without expecting anything in return, about falling in love and building a family and creating a legacy that would last for generations. Penelope Kane died quietly in her rocking chair on the porch of the ranch house, a smile on her face and Xavier's name on her lips, and those who found her said she looked peaceful and content, like someone who had lived a life full of purpose and love. They buried her next to Xavier in the Wood River Cemetery under a large oak tree, their headstones side by side just as they had lived side by side for more than 50 years. The inscription on Xavier's stone read, "Beloved husband, father, and friend," while Penelope's read, "Beloved wife, mother, and heart of our home." But underneath both names, carved into the stone so that anyone who visited would understand the foundation of their remarkable love story, were the words Xavier had spoken on that fateful day at the fort, the promise that had changed 2 lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations. "You are not alone anymore, I promise." The Kane Ranch continued to operate for another 100 years, remaining in the family and growing from the small homestead Xavier had built into a sprawling operation that employed dozens of people and supported the local economy. Every generation of Kanes learned the story of their ancestors, of the pregnant woman and the cowboy who had built something beautiful from the ashes of despair and abandonment. And in Wood River, Nebraska, where the railroad had once brought both opportunity and heartbreak, the legend of Xavier and Penelope Kane became part of the town's history, a reminder that kindness and courage and love could transform lives and create something that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. Their story was told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, in schools and churches, becoming a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of true love. And always, when the story was told, it began the same way it had lived, with a promise that was kept every day for more than 50 years. "You are not alone anymore, I promise." Those words echoed through time, a beacon of hope for anyone who felt abandoned or afraid, a reminder that sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms, wearing a worn leather vest and riding a bay mare, offering a hand up and a place to belong. And in the end, that was the true legacy of Xavier and Penelope Kane, Not just the ranch they built or the family they raised, but the example they set of what it meant to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, and commitment over convenience. They proved that families were not just born but created, that love could grow in the most unlikely circumstances, and that the most important promises were the ones we made to each other every single day through our actions and our choices. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the ranch in the modern era, maintaining the original homestead as a museum and keeping the story alive for tourists and school groups who visited to learn about life in the Old West. The small house where Xavier and Penelope had lived and loved and raised their family was preserved exactly as it had been, complete with the rocking chair where Penelope had spent her final moments, and the books Xavier had read by lamplight in the evenings. And sometimes, late at night when the wind blew across the Nebraska prairie, visitors to the ranch swore they could hear the faint sound of a deep voice singing old cowboy songs, and the gentle laughter of a woman who had found her home in the most unexpected place. The story of Xavier and Penelope Kane was a reminder that the Wild West was not just about gunfights and cattle drives and frontier justice, but also about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, about compassion triumphing over cruelty, and about love building bridges across the chasms of fear and shame and loneliness. It was a story that deserved to be remembered and celebrated, passed down through generations as an example of the best of human nature, of what we could accomplish when we chose to help rather than judge, to include rather than exclude, to love rather than abandon. And so the legend lived on, growing richer with each telling, inspiring countless people to look for opportunities to make their own promises to those who needed them most, to offer their own hands to people sitting alone and afraid, to build their own legacies of love and compassion and unwavering commitment. The fort where it all began was eventually decommissioned and torn down, but a historical marker stood on the site commemorating its role in Western expansion, and noting that it was the place where Xavier Kane had found Penelope Sullivan and made the promise that would define both their lives. "You are not alone anymore, I promise." 7 simple words that changed everything, that created a family and built a legacy, and proved that sometimes the greatest adventures began not with a gunshot or a gold strike, but with a moment of compassion and a choice to care for someone who desperately needed it. Xavier and Penelope Kane's love story became timeless precisely because it was so fundamentally human, so rooted in the basic needs we all share for connection and belonging and unconditional love. Their story resonated across generations because everyone could understand what it felt like to be alone, to be afraid, to desperately need someone to reach out a hand and pull them back from the edge. And their story offered hope that such people existed, that kindness was not extinct, that love could bloom even in the harshest conditions if it was given room to grow, and the patience to develop at its own pace. The Kane family continued to honor Xavier and Penelope's memory through their own actions, carrying forward the tradition of helping those in need and building community rather than walls. They established a foundation that provided assistance to single mothers, funded scholarships for students who wanted to study agriculture or veterinary medicine, and supported programs that connected isolated elderly people with volunteers who could provide companionship and assistance. Everything they did was rooted in the example their ancestors had set, in the understanding that one act of compassion could change the trajectory of a life, that one promise kept could create ripples that spread out for generations. And so the story ended where it began, with a promise and with love, with 2 people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, and built something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. Xavier and Penelope Kane proved that the Wild West was not just a place of violence and hardship, but also a place where courage and compassion could create miracles, where love could conquer even the most desperate circumstances, and where the right words spoken at the right moment could change absolutely everything. "You are not alone anymore, I promise." Those were the words that built a family, created a legacy, and inspired countless others to reach out to those in need with open hearts and helping hands. Those were the words that defined a love story for the ages, a testament to the enduring power of human connection and the transformative nature of unconditional love. And in Wood River, Nebraska, where the prairie stretched endlessly toward the horizon and the wind whispered through the grass, the memory of Xavier and Penelope Kane lived on, a beacon of hope and a reminder that sometimes, when all seemed lost, a cowboy on a bay mare could ride into your life and change everything with a simple promise that he would keep every day until his last breath.